Well, an international climate summit in Madrid has ended without agreement on the key issue of cutting global carbon emissions. Delegates from more than 200 nations agreed to improve their plan to reduce greenhouse gases, but postponed a decision on how to regulate the CO2 markets despite global protesters from the usual suspects. Coming in now to discuss all of this is Craig Kelly, someone who knows his way around all of these meetings. We go right back to Kyoto. Australia didn't sign it, but we exceeded our targets, which is where we get these carryover commitments from Kyoto that were a lot part of the debate, Craig, in Madrid. They allow Australia to get credit for being better than everybody else and then some. Of course, we had Copenhagen. We remember what happened there. The Paris Agreement, and now obviously Madrid. The Paris Agreement, remind me, comes into effect in about 12 months' time, doesn't it? And so these were meetings to sort of settle all of that, and some were asking for even greater targets than were committed in Paris not so long ago.
Look, you're right, Peter. This was the 25th annual one of these conferences. They like a bit of a travelling circus that goes all around the world, but the next one's in Glasgow next year, so I'm sure a lot of the 27,000 delegates that went to this conference would have already booked their ticket for next year to go and visit Glasgow. Look, but you're right. This was to try and get some of the detail for the Paris conference, but I'm actually glad you've had the UN Secretary-General, that Portuguese socialist Guterres, say this is a disappointment. And I think if he's walking away saying it's a bit of a disappointment, I think that's a win for Australia.
How concerning are you that Australia was made out to be a pariah when Australia is actually meeting its Paris targets, and Australia is one of the only nations in the world that consistently has met targets? All these others promise big, never deliver. That's
right. They like to beat up on Australia at these conferences. We seem to be one of the whipping boys. And also, Peter, what we've actually signed up to, when you look at it as per capita, is one of the highest reductions of any nation anywhere in the world. It's 26 to 28% of 2005 levels by 2030. But that's over the total economy. If you look at per capita with our population growth, it's actually a 50% reduction. Now, there's hardly any other nation in the world that's doing that. We're going to meet that target, and yet still they like to kick us at these international conferences.
Well, last week, AEMO, which is our energy regulator, said something to the effect that we're going to get out of coal by 2040 much sooner than expected. How plausible is that?
Well, what's going to keep the lights on? Surely these guys understand that no matter how many solar panels you put up, when the sun sets, there is no electricity. And no matter how many wind turbines you build, when the wind's not blowing, there is no wind. Now, we've had times in this nation recently, you can just look at the numbers, you can see when we've needed maximum power, there's been zero coming from solar power and about 5 to 10% coming from wind. So you've got to have something that you can rely on to keep the lights on. Now, I just, for the life of me, can't see how you're going to do this. The idea that you can do it with big batteries is just a complete fallacy. Just to give you an example, the world's largest battery in South Australia is 30 megawatts. It can run for about 3 to 4 hours before it conks out of power. Now, during peak demand times here, we need 30,000 megawatts. So you would need 1,000 times the world's largest battery, and that only lasts you for 4 hours. What happens after that? You've got to have, whatever we have in wind and solar, you've got to pay again to have it backed up. And I just can't see, as a nation, how we can keep the lights on unless we get a schedule to replace the existing coal-fired fleet that we have with new coal-fired power stations.
And just quickly, because we'll have to go soon, but Victoria is still on track for some power interruptions, likely brownouts and blackouts come summer. I mean, we are going backwards as a first world country.
We saw this last year when the winds didn't blow as strongly as they predicted. They didn't have enough power to go around and the state was blacked out down there in Victoria. It looks like the same thing is going to happen this year. And this is after the Energy Minister down there and Dan Andrews, when they closed down Hazelwood, they said this problem would not happen. And yet they're talking about in Victoria closing down more coal-fired power stations. This is a disaster waiting to happen. And how anyone can run a business, we've got to produce goods using energy down there, just beats me.
How can anyone run a state like that either? How can anyone run a country? Craig Kelly, as always, common sense. Thanks for the update.
Thanks, Peter.